My parents forced me and my sister to work 80 hours per week as preteens for their charity. When my sister was so overworked she passed out at an event, my parents abandoned her at the hospital to go do damage control. That's when I knew I had to blow it up, so I did, and discovered a dark family secret that made me realize what my childhood was really used for. My parents prided themselves on running a charity organization, except they didn't do any work, because most of it was left to me and my older sister Caroline. For my 7th birthday, no one even celebrated. Instead, my 13-year-old sister Caroline taught me how to organize leaflets and distribute them to the public. By this point, Caroline was working so hard for my parents that she didn't even have time to go to school more than twice a week. And at first, the principal was like, "What the F?" But when he heard it was to help with the charity organization, he let it slide. And I was next in line. Together, me and Caroline were working 40 hours a week. And since I was, in my parents' words, too dumb to do anything yet, I mainly just watched Caroline while trying to memorize everything. This was all while our parents did as minimal work as possible. They'd simply show up to the photo shoots, sign off on documents, and, their favorite pastime of all, brag about owning a charitable organization. Non-profit, their 2 favorite words. But what they failed to mention was that they were the heirs of my millionaire granddad's will, and only 2% of it was put into the charity, while the rest was poured into their pompous lifestyles. Designer handbags, spontaneous trips to Greece, a home cinema. It honestly amazed me how dumb some people were, how they never found it sus that my parents refused to ever host anything at the house, how my mom had 3 different car keys on her keyring, and whenever I asked to take a break, my parents would be sure to punish me. It wasn't like they ever hit us or anything, but if I ever tried to sleep in by an extra half an hour on the weekend, or collapse to the wooden floor in the living room out of exhaustion, she would take out her cell phone and start filming me. "If you could see yourself right now, maybe you'd finally realize how pathetic you really are," she'd say, and sometimes she'd even spit on me. Meanwhile, my dad's role was to play good cop, but not towards me. It was towards Caroline, because sometimes she'd try to comfort me, but my dad would always shove her off of me. No need to comfort your piece of poop sister. Laziness and selfishness should never be rewarded. And because of his meticulous choice of phrasing, it always worked. Eventually, I learned exactly what my parents expected, and did it without complaint, no matter how sleazy or draining their methods were. To this day, that working era is probably my favorite memory from childhood, because every day my parents would cook me and Caroline our favorite meals. Caroline was allowed to be nice to me again, and I actually felt like I had a sister. And on my 10th birthday, I finally got my day off. Our parents said I deserved it, and they let me just chill in the home cinema with a slice of fresh strawberry cheesecake from the Cheesecake Factory. I was so exhausted that I ended up sleeping for almost 18 hours that day. Caroline even came in and kissed me on the forehead before putting a blanket over me. The next morning when I woke up, I was completely foggy-headed and could barely move my body, because that day of rest was a wake-up call for how burnt out I really was. But I knew if I told them, then all hell would break loose. So I simply neglected my tasks, slept like a normal kid, went to school 5 days a week, and I guess they noticed, because they started feeding me the cheapest frozen food from the local Walmart. My meals consisted of peanut butter grape jelly sandwiches and Hot Pockets. Meanwhile, Caroline was getting fed gourmet meat and vegetables from an extremely expensive farmer's market. But I didn't care anymore, because all my brain wanted to do was rest. By this point, Caroline was 16 years old. Even though she was barely going to school, she was still smart because the stuff my parents had her doing was at a college level of knowledge. But that was just about all she had going for her, because she was extremely unhealthy. 30 pounds underweight, had eye bags that dragged down her entire face, and was crying all the time. No one cared, because all that mattered was that she was keeping the business running. At night, while our parents rested, I'd beg her to sleep a little longer, to put less pressure on herself. But my parents had done such a good job at indoctrination that she'd always reply with the same thing: "I'm not a selfish beach like you. I actually want to make a difference. Like, girl, the only thing you're making a difference in is the stock prices of Kleenex tissues." But okay, when I turned 12, my parents and Caroline decided I was old enough to be kicked out and live with my uncle, because to them, I was selfish dead weight that was dragging down the family name. I didn't want them to see me crying, so I waited until they dropped me off and drove me away to cry into my uncle's arms. I was so dizzy from the malnourishment that I was only able to cry for 10 minutes before collapsing to the floor. I could see the look of shock in my uncle's eyes as he examined my extremely pale self, and I ended up just falling asleep, drooling in his lap. I didn't know it at the time, but my uncle was about to make my parents pay. Not in some dramatic movie way with lawyers and courtrooms, but in his own quiet, determined way that turned out to be way more effective. The first thing he did was take me to a doctor. I remember sitting in the waiting room, nervous as hell because I'd only been to a doctor like twice in my life. My parents always said healthcare was for emergencies only, while they somehow managed to get Botox and teeth whitening regularly. The doctor took one look at me and ordered a bunch of tests. Turns out I was severely anemic, vitamin D deficient, and had the bone density of someone way older. The doctor asked a lot of questions about my diet and sleep patterns. My uncle sat there getting more mad off with each answer I gave. 8 hours of sleep was a luxury, I explained, not realizing how messed up that sounded until I saw the doctor's face. Usually I got like 4 or 5 hours on weeknights. My uncle started documenting everything. He took pictures of me when I first arrived. Skinny arms, dark circles under my eyes, my ribs showing through my skin. He recorded our conversations about my life at home, though he always asked permission first. "I'm not like your mom," he said. said. I won't film you without consent. About 3 weeks after I moved in with my uncle, Caroline showed up at his door. It was a Friday night, and we were in the middle of making homemade pizza. My hands were covered in flour when the doorbell rang. My uncle answered, and I heard Caroline's voice, small and uncertain, asking if she could see me. My stomach dropped. I was sure my parents had sent her to guilt me into coming back. She looked terrible, even worse than when I'd left. Her clothes hung off her frame, and her collarbones jutted out sharply under her skin. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, revealing patches where it had thinned. But what really got me were her eyes. They were desperate, almost wild. Can we talk? She asked, not coming inside. Alone? My uncle looked at me, silently asking if I was okay with this. I nodded, though my heart was pounding. We stepped outside onto the small patio. The evening air was cool, and Caroline hugged herself, shivering in her thin sweater. They want you to come back, she said without preamble. Things are falling apart without you. I almost laughed. What, they actually have to do work now? Caroline flinched. They've changed, I swear. Dad's been helping with the mailouts, and Mom's been answering donor calls. She reached for my hand. Please, just come for dinner tomorrow. See for yourself. I pulled my hand away. Why should I believe anything's different? Because I need you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I can't do this alone anymore. That got me. Despite everything, Caroline was still my sister. She'd been as much a victim as I was, maybe more so because she'd never escaped like I had. I looked at her trembling hands, the way she kept blinking back tears, and felt my resolve weaken. Just dinner, I said finally. I'm not moving back. The relief on her face was immediate. Thank you. I'll pick you up at 6 tomorrow. When I told my uncle about the dinner plan, he wasn't happy. I don't trust them, he said, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. What if they try to keep you there? They won't, I assured him, though I wasn't completely convinced myself. Caroline wouldn't lie to me, my uncle sighed. People under enough pressure will do things they'd never normally do. He pointed his knife at me. You call me if anything feels off. Anything at all. The next day, Caroline picked me up in my mom's SUV, the humble car they used for charity events. The drive to my parents' house was mostly silent. Caroline kept glancing at me nervously, like she was afraid I'd jump out at a red light. When we pulled into the driveway, I felt my chest tighten. The house looked exactly the same. Perfectly manicured lawn, tasteful exterior lighting, not a single thing out of place. It was like I'd never left. My parents were waiting in the foyer when we walked in. My mom had her public appearance smile plastered on her face. My dad stood with his hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. They'd set the dining room table with the fancy dishes they usually reserved for important donors. A catered meal was laid out, all my favorite foods from when I was younger. I recognized the expensive salmon I'd always loved, the roasted vegetables arranged in an artistic pattern, and the fresh bread from the bakery across town. It was so obviously a setup that I almost turned around and left. Welcome home, my mom said, moving as if to hug me before thinking better of it. Smart move on her part. Dinner was tense. My parents kept asking about school, about my uncle's place, about whether I was adjusting well. They didn't mention the charity once, which was weird since it was usually all they talked about. After dessert, chocolate lava cake that I barely touched, my dad cleared his throat. We've been doing some thinking, he said, exchanging glances with my mom. We may have been too hard on you. My mom nodded. The charity is important, but family comes first. She reached across the table for my hand, which I kept firmly in my lap. We want you to come home. I looked at Caroline, who was staring intently at her plate. What about the work? You still expect me to help with the charity? Well, of course, my dad said, his tone suggesting I was being ridiculous. But we can be more flexible. Maybe just weekends and after school. And there it was. Nothing had changed. They still expected me to work for their fake charity. They just realized they needed me to do the grunt work they were too lazy to do themselves. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. No thanks, I said. I'm good at Uncle Mike's. My mom's face hardened. Don't be difficult, sweetie. We're trying to compromise here. Compromise would be letting me be a normal kid, I shot back. Not working me like some kind of child laborer. My dad's face flushed red. After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me? I interrupted. Fed me the cheapest food while you ate gourmet? Worked me until I collapsed? Filmed me when I was exhausted? Caroline finally looked up. They really have been helping more, she said quietly. Dad's been doing the accounting, and Mom's been organizing the donor database. I stared at her, realization dawning. They put you up to this, didn't they? They made you come get me. The flash of guilt in her eyes told me everything. My parents hadn't changed at all. They'd just manipulated Caroline into doing their dirty work, knowing I'd be more likely to listen to her than to them. I felt sick. I'm leaving, I announced, pulling out my phone to call my uncle. This was a waste of time. My mom's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. You're not going anywhere. This ridiculous rebellion ends now. I yanked my arm away. Watch me. What followed was a shouting match that probably had the neighbors wondering what was happening in the perfect charity family's house. My parents threatened to cut me off completely, to tell everyone what an ungrateful brat I was. I told them to go ahead. I had nothing to lose. The whole time, Caroline sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. My uncle arrived 20 minutes later, his ancient Toyota screeching into the driveway. He didn't even knock, just walked right in like he owned the place. My parents immediately switched to their public personas, concerned, reasonable adults dealing with a troubled child. Mike, we're just trying to work things out as a family, my mom said sweetly. There's no need for you to get involved. My uncle wasn't buying it. Let's go, kid, he said to me, completely ignoring my parents. You got everything you came with? I nodded, already heading for the door. Caroline suddenly stood up. Wait, she said, her voice small but determined. Can I come too? Just for tonight? My parents' fake smiles vanished instantly. My dad took a step toward Caroline, his face thunderous. Sit Sit down. You're not going anywhere. Caroline flinched but stood her ground. I just want to talk to him. I'll come back tomorrow. If you leave this house, my mom hissed, don't bother coming back at all. The look on Caroline's face broke my heart. She was torn between the fear of defying our parents and the desperate need to escape, even if just for one night. In the end, fear won out. She sank back into her chair, defeated. I'm sorry, she whispered to me. I can't. The drive back to my uncle's place was silent. I stared out the window, replaying the evening in my head. My uncle kept glancing at me, concern etched on his face. They haven't changed at all, I finally said. They just want their free labor back. My uncle's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I was afraid of that. And they're using Caroline to get to me. She looks worse than when I left. We'll figure something out, my uncle promised. We won't leave her there. The next few weeks were rough. My parents started a smear campaign against my uncle. They told family members he was unstable and filling my head with lies. They claimed he was keeping me from them out of some twisted jealousy. Some relatives believed them. My grandma on my mom's side called me crying, begging me to stop this nonsense and go home. I tried to explain, but she didn't want to hear it. My uncle started getting weird looks at the grocery store. Neighbors who used to chat with him suddenly found reasons to cross the street when they saw him coming. The whispers followed us everywhere. Poor charity couple whose troubled son was stolen away by a vindictive brother-in-law. Don't worry about it, my uncle told me when I mentioned the whispers. People can think what they want. We know the truth. But I did worry. My uncle was losing friends because of me. His boss at the construction company where he worked as a foreman called him in for a chat after my mom apparently sent an email expressing concerns about his mental state. Nothing came of it, but the message was clear. My parents were trying to isolate us. Meanwhile, I was worried sick about Caroline. She wasn't answering my texts or calls. The few times I tried calling the house phone, my parents picked up and hung up as soon as they heard my voice. I even went by her school once during lunch period, but she wasn't there. A girl who recognized me said Caroline hadn't been to school in over a week. That's when I decided I needed proof of what my parents were really doing. Not for me, I was safe with my uncle, but for Caroline. She needed to see the truth before it was too late. My uncle's friend Jeremy worked as an accountant. After hearing our story, he agreed to look into my parents' charity. It took him a few weeks of digging through public records, but what he found confirmed what I'd always suspected. The charity was bringing in substantial donations, but only a tiny fraction was going to actual charitable work. The rest was being funneled through a maze of accounts and eventually into my parents' personal expenses. This is fraud, Jeremy said bluntly, showing us spreadsheets that made my head spin. They're using a non-profit as their personal piggy bank. My uncle wanted to go to the police right away, but I hesitated. What about Caroline? If my parents get arrested, what happens to her? She'd probably go into foster care, Jeremy admitted, unless there's a relative willing to take her. I would, my uncle said immediately, but your parents would fight it tooth and nail. We needed to get Caroline on our side first. She had to understand what our parents were really doing, but how could we reach her when they had her completely isolated? The opportunity came in the most unexpected way. About a month after the disastrous dinner, my uncle got a call from the local hospital. Caroline had been admitted for severe exhaustion and malnutrition. She'd collapsed during a charity event and had to be rushed to the emergency room. Since my uncle was listed as an emergency contact on some old school forms, they called him when they couldn't reach my parents. We raced to the hospital, my heart pounding with fear and guilt. If I hadn't left, would Caroline have pushed herself this hard? Would she be lying in a hospital bed right now? She looked terrible, hooked up to IVs, her skin almost translucent, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. But the worst part was seeing her laptop open on the hospital tray table. Even here, she was still working on charity stuff. Spreadsheets and donor emails were open on the screen. Jesus, Caroline, I whispered, taking her cold hand in mine. What are they doing to you? Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she looked confused. Then recognition dawned. You came, she said, her voice barely audible. Of course I came. You're my sister. She tried to sit up, but winced in pain. Don't tell them you're here. They'll be mad. Where are they anyway? My uncle asked, looking around the empty room. Caroline's laugh was hollow. Damage control. Making sure donors don't hear about this. Can't have people thinking the charity doesn't take care of its own. My uncle's face darkened. They left you alone in the hospital to do PR? Caroline just shrugged, like this was perfectly normal. And for her, I guess it was. That's when I knew we had to show her the truth, no matter how painful. Caroline, we need to talk about Mom and Dad, about the charity. Her eyes immediately shuddered. Don't start that again. They're doing important work. Are they? I pulled out the folder Jeremy had prepared, because according to their financial records, most of the money isn't going to any causes. It's going to their bank accounts. Caroline shook her head weakly. That's not true. I see the reports. We help lots of people. You see the reports they want you to see? My uncle said gently. Look at these. He spread out the documents on her bed. These are the real numbers. For the next hour, we walked her through everything Jeremy had found. The shell companies, the inflated administrative costs, the minimal actual charitable giving. Caroline's face went from disbelief to confusion to dawning horror. This can't be right, she kept saying. I do all this work. For nothing? Not for nothing, I told her. For them. For their lifestyle. Tears welled in her eyes. All those hours. All those missed school days. For what? So Mom could buy another purse? It was heartbreaking watching her world collapse. Everything she'd believed in, everything she'd sacrificed for, was a lie. But as painful as it was, I could also see something else happening. She was finally seeing our parents for who they really were. What do we do now? She asked, wiping away tears with a trembling hand. Before we could answer, we heard familiar voices in the hallway. My parents had returned. My uncle quickly gathered up the documents documents and shoved them back in the folder. Think about what we showed you, I whispered urgently. We can help you, but you have to want it. Caroline squeezed my hand. Come back tomorrow. They have a board meeting in the afternoon. We can talk more then. I slipped out the back entrance of the hospital room just as my parents walked in the main door. Through the crack, I could see Caroline's face transform. The vulnerable, broken girl instantly replaced by the dutiful daughter. It was an act I recognized all too well. I'd performed it myself for years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Caroline in that hospital bed, still working despite being so sick she could barely sit up. Our parents had done that to her. They'd convinced her that her worth was tied to how much she could produce for them, just like they'd tried to do to me. The next day, we returned to the hospital as planned. Caroline looked marginally better, though still frighteningly thin, but there was something different about her eyes, a clarity that hadn't been there before. I've been thinking about what you showed me, she said as soon as we were alone, and I checked some things on my own. She turned her laptop toward us. I found these hidden folders on the shared drive, financial records that don't match what's in our annual reports. My uncle leaned in, scanning the screen. This is even worse than what we found. They're not just misusing funds, they're actively hiding income. Caroline nodded grimly. I always wondered why they were so insistent on me handling certain accounts personally. Now I know. They didn't want anyone else seeing the real numbers. So you believe us? I asked, hardly daring to hope. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. I didn't want to, but yes, I believe you. She took a shaky breath. What do we do now? My uncle sat on the edge of her bed. First, you focus on getting better. Then, when you're strong enough, you come stay with us. They won't let me, Caroline said, fear creeping back into her voice. You know they won't. They won't have a choice, my uncle promised. Not once people know what they've been doing. We spent the next hour planning. Caroline would gather more evidence from the inside. Copies of financial records, emails, anything that proved what our parents were doing. My uncle would consult with Jeremy about the best way to expose the fraud without getting Caroline in trouble. And I would be ready to support my sister when she finally made her escape. As we were leaving, Caroline grabbed my hand. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking, for everything, for not protecting you, for believing them over you. I hugged her carefully, mindful of the IV lines. You were a victim too. We both were. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my sister back. Not the brainwashed workaholic my parents had created, but the real Caroline who used to sneak me extra dessert and tuck me in at night. We were going to take down our parents' fake charity empire, and we were going to do it together. Little did I know, my parents were already suspicious. They'd noticed the missing files on the shared drive. They'd seen Caroline's search history, and they were preparing to make sure neither of us could threaten what they'd built. The battle for the truth and for Caroline's freedom was just beginning, and it was going to get a lot uglier before it got better. The next day, I got a frantic call from Caroline. She was whispering so quietly I could barely hear her. They know something's up, she said, her voice shaking. Dad was looking through my laptop while I was sleeping. I woke up and caught him. He said he was just checking my work, but he looked super sketchy about it. My stomach dropped. Did he find anything? I don't think so. I've been saving everything to a hidden folder on a USB drive. She paused, and I heard footsteps in the background. I have to go. They're coming back. The line went dead before I could respond. I immediately called my uncle, who was at work. He promised to come home early so we could figure out what to do. When my uncle got home, we sat at the kitchen table brainstorming. Jeremy joined us, bringing more documents he'd dug up about my parents' finances. The picture was getting clearer and uglier by the minute. They've been skimming donations for at least 8 years, Jeremy said, pointing to a spreadsheet. Started small but got bolder over time. Last year alone, they diverted almost $200,000 to personal expenses. My uncle whistled. That's a lot of designer handbags. And trips to Greece, I added, thinking about all the times they'd disappeared for charity conferences that were actually luxury vacations. We were interrupted by another call from Caroline. This time she sounded even more scared. They're discharging me tomorrow, she said, but they're not taking me home. I overheard them talking about sending me to stay with Aunt Patricia for a while. Aunt Patricia lived in Arizona, thousands of miles away. She was my mom's older sister and totally bought into my parents' perfect charity family image. If Caroline went there, we'd lose our chance to help her. We need to move faster, my uncle said after I relayed what Caroline told me. Jeremy, how quickly can we get this information to the right people? Jeremy looked uncomfortable. That's the thing. With financial fraud this complex, we'd need to go to the authorities. That means police reports, investigations, which could take months, my uncle finished, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I thought about Caroline, alone and scared in that hospital bed. We didn't have months. We barely had days. What about the family reunion next weekend? I suddenly remembered. Everyone will be there, right? Including the board members of the charity? My uncle's eyes widened. You're thinking of confronting them publicly? Not just confronting them, exposing them in front of everyone who matters. It was risky. My parents were master manipulators who had fooled people for years, but it was also our best shot at getting Caroline out before they shipped her off to Arizona. The next morning, I snuck into the hospital while my parents were supposedly meeting with Caroline's doctors. I found her sitting on the edge of her bed, already dressed in street clothes, looking terrified. They're sending me to Aunt Patricia's tomorrow, she confirmed, her voice hollow. They said it's for my recovery, but I know they just want me away from you. I sat beside her. We have a plan, but we need everything you've collected so far. Caroline reached under her pillow and pulled out a small USB drive. It's all here. Financial records, emails, even recordings of mom and dad discussing how to hide money from the board. She pressed it into my hand. Be careful with this. If they find out I took these files, I pocketed the drive. They won't, and you won't be going to to Arizona. I promise. I told her about our plan to expose everything at the family reunion. Her eyes widened. That's in 3 days. Can you get everything ready by then? We have to, I said simply. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Jeremy organized all the evidence into clear, undeniable proof of fraud. My uncle reached out to a few trusted family members who had always been skeptical of my parents' perfect image. I prepared myself mentally for the confrontation, knowing my parents would fight back with everything they had. The day of the reunion arrived. It was being held at my grandparents' large country home, the same place where family gatherings had always happened. My uncle and I arrived early, setting up in the guest bedroom. I was a nervous wreck, pacing back and forth while my uncle tried to calm me down. Remember, stick to the facts, he advised. Don't let them bait you into an emotional argument. That's where they'll try to discredit you. I nodded, taking deep breaths. Through the window, I watched cars pulling into the driveway. Aunts, uncles, cousins, board members of the charity in their expensive cars, and finally, my parents' SUV, the humble one they used for public appearances. My heart raced when I saw Caroline get out of the back seat. She looked slightly better than she had in the hospital, but still frighteningly thin. My mom had her arm around Caroline's shoulders, but it looked more possessive than supportive. It's time, my uncle said, gathering our folders of evidence. We made our way downstairs to the large living room where everyone was gathering. My parents spotted me immediately. My mom's fake smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. Look who decided to join the family after all, she said loudly, drawing attention to me. We've missed you, sweetheart. Several relatives turned to look at me with varying expressions, confusion, sympathy, judgment. I felt my resolve wavering under their stares. Then I caught Caroline's eye. She gave me the tiniest nod, and my determination returned. My uncle cleared his throat. Before we start the usual festivities, there's something important that needs to be addressed. My dad stepped forward, his charity director persona in full effect. Mike, this is hardly the time or place for whatever grievances you think you have. Actually, it's exactly the right time and place, I said, finding my voice, since everyone who's been deceived is right here. A murmur ran through the room. My grandmother looked confused. What's going on? Jeremy stepped forward with his laptop and a portable projector we'd brought. If I could have everyone's attention, there are some financial records you all need to see. My mom tried to intervene. This is ridiculous. We're not turning a family reunion into some sort of business meeting. It's not a business meeting, I said clearly. It's the truth about where all those donations to your charity actually go. The next 30 minutes were intense. Jeremy methodically walked everyone through the evidence, the diverted funds, the fake expenses, the minimal actual charitable work. My uncle distributed printed copies of key documents. I explained how Caroline and I had been forced to do most of the work while our parents took the credit and the money. The room grew increasingly quiet as the evidence mounted. My parents tried to interrupt several times, but each time they were shut down by another damning piece of evidence. Caroline sat silently, tears streaming down her face, nodding occasionally to confirm what I was saying. When we finished, the silence was deafening. My dad was the first to recover. This is all a misunderstanding, he said smoothly. Financial matters can look suspicious when taken out of context. If you'll allow me to explain, there's nothing to explain, said my Aunt Teresa, who was also on the charities board. She was holding one of the financial reports, her face pale with shock. These numbers don't lie. You've been stealing from the charity. Not stealing, my mom insisted. Managing funds in a way that benefits everyone. How does your trip to Greece benefit anyone but you? Asked my uncle. More voices joined in, asking questions, expressing outrage. My parents' carefully constructed facade was crumbling before my eyes. They grew increasingly desperate, pointing fingers at Jeremy, an accountant with a grudge, at my uncle, jealous of our success, and finally at me and Caroline, ungrateful children who never appreciated our sacrifices. That last accusation was too much for Caroline. She stood up shakily, her voice quiet but firm. Sacrifices? What sacrifices did you make? I missed most of high school working for your fake charity. I ended up in the hospital because you worked me until I collapsed, and even there, you made me keep working. Her voice grew stronger. I believed in what we were doing. I thought we were helping people, but we weren't. We were just helping you buy more stuff. My mom tried to put her arm around Caroline. Sweetheart, you're still recovering. You're confused. Caroline jerked away from her touch. I'm not confused. Not anymore. She walked over to stand beside me. Everything they're saying is true. I have the records to prove it. The family erupted into chaos. Some relatives were yelling at my parents. Others were crying. The charity board members huddled in a corner, looking shell-shocked. Through it all, my parents kept trying to regain control, to spin the narrative, but it was too late. The truth was out. My grandpa, who had been silent until now, finally stood up. As the family patriarch and the source of my parents' inherited wealth, his opinion carried weight. I've heard and seen enough, he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Robert, Diana, I want your resignations from the charity board by tomorrow morning. All funds will be frozen pending a full audit. My dad's face went red. You can't do that. We built this organization from nothing. No, I corrected him. Caroline and I built it. You just took the credit and the cash. My grandpa nodded. The children will be staying with Mike until this is sorted out, and there will be consequences for what you've done. My parents looked around the room, desperately seeking allies, but found none. The perfect image they'd cultivated for years had been shattered beyond repair. Without another word, they grabbed their coats and left, the door slamming behind them. In the aftermath, Caroline collapsed into a chair, exhausted but relieved. Family members came up to us, some apologizing for not seeing the truth sooner, others offering support. The charity board immediately began discussing how to restructure without my parents involved. My uncle put his arms around both me and Caroline. "You kids did good. Really good." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. My parents tried to fight back, spreading more lies about us, but nobody was listening anymore. The charity underwent a complete overhaul, with legitimate board members taking control. My grandparents, horrified by what their son and daughter-in-law had done, made sure Caroline and I were provided for. Caroline moved in with me and my uncle. At first, she slept almost constantly, her body finally allowed to recover from years of exhaustion. When she was stronger, she started seeing a therapist to deal with the emotional fallout. I went with her sometimes, working through my own issues from our messed-up childhood. My parents eventually moved away, unable to face the community they'd deceived for so long. I heard they got jobs at some corporate place where they couldn't scam anyone. We didn't keep in touch. As for the charity, it actually started doing real work under new leadership. Caroline and I consulted occasionally, but mostly we focused on being normal teenagers. I joined the school soccer team. Caroline got into photography. We both made friends who liked us for who we were, not what we could do for them. Sometimes I still have nightmares about those years of working nonstop, about my mom filming me when I was too exhausted to move, but they're getting less frequent. My uncle says healing takes time, and he's right. The best part is having my sister back. Not the overworked, brainwashed version our parents created, but the real Caroline who laughs at dumb jokes and stays up too late watching movies with me. We're rebuilding our relationship one day at a time, figuring out who we are without our parents' manipulation. It's not perfect. We both have scars that might never fully heal, but we're free now, and that's what matters most.